The first blow caught Thomas Riley squarely in the jaw and sending shockwaves of pain through his skull. Blood pooled in his mouth, tasting of iron and defeat. The second strike drove into his ribs with a sickening crack. Despite the agony, he forced himself back to his feet, placing his body between the three towering Vexian aliens and the terrified child cowering against the cold metal wall. "Step aside, human," growled the largest Vexian, his gray-ridged skin glistening under the harsh emergency lighting of the maintenance tunnel. "This is not your concern." Thomas wiped blood from his split lip, his weathered face revealing nothing of the pain coursing through his 58-year-old body. His security uniform, emblazoned with the Frontier Point Interplanetary Center logo, was already torn and stained crimson. The badge that identified him as nothing more than a basic security guard seemed almost laughable in the face of the heavily armed aliens before him. "The kid stays with me," Thomas said, his voice steady despite his ragged breathing. "Whatever you want, you'll have to go through me first." The Vexians exchanged glances, their luminous yellow eyes narrowing with cruel amusement. They stood nearly 7 feet tall, their muscular frames encased in dark combat gear, energy weapons humming at their sides. Against them, the aging security guards seemed woefully outmatched. "Brave words for a dead man," the leader hissed, activating an energy baton that crackled with blue electricity. Behind Thomas, the small Stellaris child whimpered. Her silvery blue skin shimmered with fear, large violet eyes brimming with tears. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old by human standards. Thomas had seen her around the center with her mother, an important diplomat or military officer, he recalled. The child had always smiled at him during security rounds, one of the few aliens who acknowledged his existence at all. The first Vexian lunged forward, energy batons slashing through the air. Thomas moved with unexpected speed, sidestepping the attack and countering with a precise strike to the alien's throat. The Vexian staggered back momentarily, shocked by the human's skill. His companions hesitated, reassessing the seemingly ordinary security guard. Their surprise gave Thomas a moment's advantage, one he knew wouldn't last. His body might be older, but muscle memory from decades of combat training remained intact. Former Special Forces operators never truly forgot what they'd learned in the killing fields, no matter how many years passed or how deeply they buried their pasts. "Run," he shouted to the child, but she remained frozen in terror, pressed against the wall. The Vexians attacked together, this time a coordinated assault that overwhelmed Thomas's defenses. The energy baton connected with his shoulder, sending electricity surging through his body. His muscles seized and he dropped to one knee, gritting his teeth against the pain. A brutal kick to his chest sent him sprawling across the floor. Every instinct screamed at him to stay down, but Thomas fought against his body's demands for surrender. The girl's frightened eyes met his, and in them he saw another child from long ago, another innocent caught in the crossfire of adult conflicts. He had failed to save that child in the dust and heat of Iraq. He would not fail again. Thomas Riley rose once more. Blood streamed from a gash above his eye as he positioned himself between the Vexians and the girl. His stance shifted subtly, feet planted firmly, hands raised in a defensive posture that spoke of years of hand-to-hand combat training. "Who are you?" demanded the Vexian leader, genuine confusion in his guttural voice. Thomas didn't answer. Words were meaningless now. Only actions would determine whether the child lived or died. When the next attack came, he met it with the last reserves of his strength. He absorbed punishment that would have killed a younger man each blow, bringing fresh agony, each moment of resistance buying precious seconds. In the distance, the wail of security alarms finally pierced the air. Help was coming. Thomas just needed to hold on a little longer. The Vexians heard it too, their attacks growing more frenzied as they realized their window was closing. "Kill them both," the leader commanded. The Vexian nearest to Thomas drew a sidearm, its barrel glowing with deadly energy. Time seemed to slow as Thomas lunged forward, knowing he wouldn't reach the alien before the weapon discharged. In that suspended moment between life and death, Thomas felt an odd peace. At least he would die protecting someone rather than alone in his sparse apartment with nothing but memories and regrets. The shot never came. Security forces flooded the maintenance tunnel of weapons drawn. The Vexians found themselves surrounded, outnumbered. They surrendered quickly, pragmatic enough to recognize a lost cause. As station security secured the aliens, Thomas collapsed to the floor, his battered body finally giving out. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was the Stellaris child rushing to his side, her small hand touching his bloodied face with surprising gentleness. "Thank you," she whispered in perfect English, her voice musical and clear. Then darkness took him and Thomas Riley knew no more. White light pierced Thomas's consciousness like a knife. He blinked against the painful brightness, his entire body a symphony of agony. The antiseptic smell of a medical bay filled his nostrils, a scent he knew too well from battlefields across the globe. "He's awake," said a crisp female voice. Thomas tried to focus his vision, this world gradually solidifying around him. He lay in a medical pod, advanced technology monitoring his vital signs. The readouts would show 3 broken ribs, a fractured jaw, internal bleeding, and more contusions than worth counting. Nothing fatal, but enough to remind him that he was no longer the young soldier who could shrug off such punishment. A figure stepped into his field of vision, tall and regal, with the same silvery blue skin as the child he'd protected. This was a full-grown Stellaris, her presence commanding immediate attention. She wore a midnight blue uniform adorned with silver insignia that marked her as high-ranking military. Her violet eyes, so like the child's, studied him with an intensity that seemed to penetrate his carefully constructed facade. "I am Commander Alara Starlight of the Stellaris Defense Force," she said, her voice melodic yet authoritative. "Lumina is my daughter. You saved her life." Thomas attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his torso. "Easy," Alara cautioned, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've been unconscious for 26 hours. Your injuries were extensive." "The girl Lumina, is she all right?" Thomas asked, his voice rough from disuse. Something shifted in Alara's expression, surprise perhaps that his first question was about her daughter rather than his own condition. "She is unharmed thanks to your intervention," Alara replied, frightened but physically uninjured. Thomas nodded, satisfaction briefly overtaking his pain. "Good, that's what matters." He became aware of another presence in the room, a small figure half hidden behind her mother. Lumina peered at him with wide, curious eyes, no longer filled with terror, but with wonder. "Hello again," Thomas said softly, attempting a smile despite his swollen jaw. Lumina stepped forward, clutching something in her small hands. "I brought you this," she said, offering him a small, crystalline object that glowed with a gentle blue light. "It's a healing stone from my homeworld. We give them to brave warriors." Thomas accepted the gift with surprising tenderness from hands that had once taken lives in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan. "Thank you, Lumina. That's very kind." Alara watched this exchange with an unreadable expression. "The medical staff says you'll need several more days to recover fully," she said. "I've arranged for private security outside this room. The Vexians who attacked my daughter are part of a dangerous criminal syndicate. They may try to finish what they started." "That's not necessary," Thomas began to protest. "It is necessary," Alara interrupted firmly. "You are under my protection now, Mr. Riley. That is not negotiable." The use of his name caught Thomas off guard. "Done. You know who I am. I made inquiries after your heroic actions," Alara said, studying him carefully. "Frontier Point's records indicate you're a simple security guard hired 3 years ago with minimal background checks. A quiet man who keeps to himself, does his job efficiently, and causes no trouble." There was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by this official narrative. Thomas remained silent, his face a practiced mask of neutrality. He had learned long ago that silence often revealed less than carefully chosen words. "Rest now," Alara said after a moment. "We will speak again when you are stronger." As she turned to leave, Thomas called out, "Commander Starlight." She paused, looking back at him. "Why was your daughter alone in the maintenance tunnels?" A shadow crossed Alara's face. She wasn't supposed to be. Her educational group was touring the public levels of Frontier Point when she was separated and lured away. The Vexians are skilled infiltrators. She hesitated before adding, "They targeted her specifically, Mr. Riley. That is all you need to know for now." After they left, Thomas sank back into the medical pod, his mind racing despite his exhaustion. He had spent years cultivating invisibility, becoming the forgettable security guard that no one gave a second glance. Now he had drawn attention to himself in the most spectacular way possible. As consciousness began to fade again, memories from another life surfaced unbidden. Desert heat and the crack of gunfire. The weight of responsibility for his men. The fateful decision in Kandahar that had cost him everything. Thomas Riley drifted back into uneasy sleep, haunted by ghosts from a past he could never truly escape. 3 days passed before Thomas was deemed fit enough to leave the medical bay. His body still ached with every movement, but he had endured worse. The private security Alara had assigned two stone-faced Stellaris warriors followed at a respectful distance as Thomas made his way through the corridors of Frontier Point. The massive interplanetary center built in the Arizona desert after first contact in 2063 served as Earth's primary hub for extraterrestrial diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. Rising like a gleaming silver flower from the red desert landscape, its spires and domes housed representatives from 27 known sentient species. Thomas had chosen it precisely because of its anonymity, a place where a disgraced Special Forces operator could disappear among the masses. Now that anonymity was shattered. People stared as he passed humans and aliens alike. Word of his confrontation with the Vexians had spread throughout the station. Some nodded respectfully. Others whispered behind their hands. A few alien species made gestures he recognized as signs of respect or blessing. Thomas kept his eyes forward, his face impassive. The attention was unwelcome, dangerous even. He had enemies who would notice such stories, who might connect the dots between a heroic security guard and a former soldier declared killed in action years ago. His sparse apartment felt like a sanctuary when he finally reached it. Located in the human residential sector, the small living space contained little more than essentials: a bed-basic kitchen unit in a worn armchair facing the window that looked out over the desert. No photographs adorned the walls, no mementos from his former life. His few possessions were practical rather than sentimental. Thomas moved to the hidden compartment beneath his bed, entering a complex sequence of pressure points that revealed a concealed safe. Inside lay the remnants of a life officially erased: military ID tags, a combat knife with worn inscriptions, and a carefully maintained M1911 pistol that had seen him through 3 combat tours. Relics of Captain Thomas Riley, Special Forces, supposedly killed during a classified operation in 2066. The secure communication unit in the compartment blinked with an incoming message, the first in over a year. Thomas hesitated before activating it, already knowing who would be on the other end. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing the weathered face of General Marcus Stone, his former commanding officer, and one of the few people who knew he was still alive. "You just couldn't stay invisible, could you, Tom?" the general said without preamble, his gravelly voice tinged with equal parts amusement and concern. "The girl would have died," Thomas replied simply. Stone sighed, running a hand through his silver-gray hair. "Always the same with you. Some things never change." He leaned closer to the camera. "Reports are already circulating through military channels. A security guard with unexpected combat proficiency neutralizing multiple Vexian operatives. You might as well have sent up a flare." "I had no choice. You never do when innocents are involved." There was no judgment in Stone's voice, just weary acceptance. "Listen carefully, the Vexians you encountered weren't common criminals. They're part of a militant faction called the Shadow Claw, led by a warlord named Thorax. They've been escalating tensions with the Stellaris for years." Thomas absorbed this information silently, his tactical mind already processing its implications. "Commander Starlight isn't just any Stellaris officer," Stone continued. "She's their leading weapons developer and tactical commander. Her daughter was targeted to force her cooperation. This goes deeper than you realize." "How do you know all this?" Thomas asked, though he suspected the answer. Stone's expression hardened. "Because we've been monitoring the situation. Earth has interests in maintaining peaceful relations with both species. A full-scale conflict between Vexians and Stellaris could draw us in, especially with Frontier Point on our soil. And now I'm in the middle of it," Thomas concluded. "Precisely. Watch your back, Tom. If Thorax's people figure out who you really are, they won't stop until you're dead." Stone paused. "And if certain elements within our own government identify you, they might finish what they started after Kandahar." The name of that blood-soaked city hung between them, laden with unspoken history. "I'll be careful," Thomas promised. "See that you are. I can't officially protect you if your cover's blown." Stone's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, what you did for that child, it was the right call. Always was your specialty, doing the right thing, no matter the case. The communication ended, leaving Thomas alone with thoughts darker than the deepening dusk outside his window. He returned to his armchair, watching as the desert sun painted the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples colors, not unlike the burning villages he'd seen in another life. His door chimed, interrupting his brooding. Thomas approached cautiously, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon he wasn't carrying. The security panel showed Commander Alara Starlight standing outside alone. He opened the door, surprise momentarily breaking through his composed exterior. "Commander," Ahinanender, he greeted her neutrally. "I wasn't expecting visitors." "May I enter, Mr. Riley?" she asked, her regal bearing somewhat out of place in the utilitarian human residential quarter. Thomas stepped aside, gesturing her in. He noticed her appraising gaze as it swept the sparse apartment, likely noting both what was present and what was conspicuously absent. "Your security detail," he inquired, seeing she had come unaccompanied. "Dismissed for the moment. This conversation requires privacy." She turned to face him directly. "I need to know who you really are, Thomas Riley." The directness of her question caught him off guard. For a moment, he considered maintaining his cover story, the retired security specialist with a background in private contracting. Something in her violet eyes told him she wouldn't believe the lie. "What makes you think I'm someone other than who I claim to be?" he countered. "3 trained Vexian operatives," she replied evenly. "You fought them using military combat techniques I recognize, specifically human special operations close-quarter battle methods. Your instincts weren't those of a security guard, but of a commander assessing threats and protecting civilians. Even injured, you positioned yourself for maximum tactical advantage." She took a step closer. "Most telling of all, you didn't hesitate. Ordinary men freeze when faced with such odds. You acted instantly with the decisiveness of someone who has made life or death decisions before." Thomas remained silent, his face revealing nothing. "I've studied Earth's military history and tactics extensively," Alara continued. "It's part of my role as defense commander. You move like someone trained in your special forces. Your wounds show evidence of previous combat injuries professionally treated, and there's the matter of your left forearm." Thomas instinctively glanced down at his arm, where beneath his sleeve lay a particular scar pattern, the result of an IED in Iraq during Operation Desert Storm. "That scarring is consistent with injuries sustained by Earth soldiers during your Gulf War," Alara said softly. "I believe you were there." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "What do you want, Commander?" Thomas finally asked. "The truth," she replied. "My daughter's life may depend on it, and perhaps many others as well." Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the darkening desert. For years, he had lived in the shadows, hiding from his past and from those who wanted him silenced. Now this alien woman had pierced his carefully constructed disguise with unsettling ease. "Captain Thomas Riley, U.S. Army Special Forces," he said at last, his voice low and even. "Officially killed in action in 2066 during a classified operation in Afghanistan." Alara showed no surprise, only nodding as though confirming a hypothesis. "And unofficially, I made a decision that powerful people disagreed with, the kind of decision that ends careers and creates enemies." Thomas turned back to face her. "I refused a direct order that would have resulted in civilian casualties. The target was eliminated by other means, but not before collateral damage occurred. My team suffered losses. I was given a choice: disappear or face court-martial for insubordination that cost American lives." "So you chose to disappear," Alara concluded. "I chose to live with what I'd done and what I refused to do," Thomas corrected. "The man I was died that day in Kandahar. This," he gestured to the sparse apartment, "is what remains." Alara studied him with those penetrating violet eyes. "And yet, when my daughter was in danger, that man returned. You risked everything to save a child you didn't know from a species not your own." Thomas had no answer for that. He hadn't planned his intervention. He had simply acted as he always had when innocents were threatened. "Do you know what Valorian means in my culture, Thomas Riley?" Alara asked suddenly. He shook his head. "It is an ancient word that translates roughly to sacred guardian. When someone willingly places themselves between harm and a child not of their blood or species, they create a bond that our people consider unbreakable." Her voice took on a formal quality as though reciting something sacred. By the ancient laws of Stellaris, you have become Lumina's Valorian, her protector and guardian in the eyes of our people. Thomas blinked, caught off guard by this unexpected turn. I was just doing what anyone would do. No, Alara said firmly. Most beings would have walked away. Even many warriors would hesitate to face three armed Vexians alone. But you did not hesitate. You stood your ground, knowing you would likely die. She stepped closer. Such courage is rare across all species, Thomas Riley. It deserves recognition. I don't need recognition, he said quietly. I only need to know the girl is safe. Something in Alara's expression softened. That is exactly why you are worthy of being her Valorian. She moved to the door before turning back. Rest tonight. Tomorrow I will come for you. There is a ceremony that must be performed to formalize your role as Lumina's guardian. Commander, Thomas called as she prepared to leave. The Vexians who attacked your daughter. They're part of the Shadowclaw faction led by Thorax, aren't they? Alara's body tensed visibly. How do you know that name? I have my own sources, Thomas replied evenly. What I don't know is why they targeted Lumina specifically. Alara hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. Thorax lost his son in a battle I commanded 5 years ago, she said finally. He has sworn vengeance against me and all I hold dear. But there is more at stake than a personal vendetta. I lead a research division developing technology that could shift the balance of power in our sector. The Vexians want it badly enough to use my daughter as leverage. And now that their first attempt failed, they will try again, Alara stated with grim certainty, with greater force and less subtlety. That is why I need you, Thomas Riley, not just as a symbolic guardian, but as the warrior you truly are. Her eyes locked with his. Will you help us? Thomas thought of the life he had built here, quiet, anonymous, safe. He thought of the man he had once been, the oath he had taken to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He thought of little Lumina's face, innocent and trusting despite the violence she had witnessed. Yes, he said simply, I'll help you. Alara nodded once, a gesture of both gratitude and respect between soldiers. Tomorrow then, she said, and was gone. Thomas returned to his window, watching as the last light faded from the desert sky. Stars emerged, distant worlds where beings like Alara and Lumina lived lives he could scarcely imagine. For years he had existed in a self-imposed exile, neither truly living nor dead. Now circumstances had thrust him back into the world of conflict and consequence. As he prepared for sleep, Thomas removed his combat knife from its hiding place, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. He had carried it through 3 wars across 2 decades. Perhaps it had one more fight left in it, and so did he. The Grand Hall of Frontier Point shimmered with an otherworldly light. Crystal chandeliers imported from the Stellaris homeworld cast rainbow refractions across the gathered assembly. Representatives from a dozen alien species stood in concentric circles around a central dais, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. Thomas Riley felt distinctly out of place as he entered, guided by 2 Stellaris honor guards. He wore his standard security uniform, freshly pressed, but still marked with the subtle repairs where Vexian weapons had torn through it days earlier. He had refused Alara's offer of ceremonial garments, preferring the honest simplicity of the identity he had chosen for himself. Whispers rippled through the crowd as he passed. Many had heard of the human security guard who had faced down 3 Vexian warriors to protect a child. Some looked on with approval, others with curiosity, and a few with open skepticism. Thomas kept his eyes forward, his military bearing impossible to disguise despite his civilian status. At the center of the hall, Alara Starlight stood resplendent in formal military attire. Her midnight blue uniform gleamed with silver decorations that caught the light with each movement. Beside her, Lumina waited in a simple white dress adorned with crystals similar to the one she had given Thomas in the medical bay. As Thomas approached, he noticed other significant figures on the dais. Representatives from Earth's Interstellar Relations Department watched with diplomatic neutrality. The Frontier Point Administrator, a tall Centaurian with 4 arms, observed with obvious approval. Most surprising was the presence of General Marcus Stone in full military dress uniform, his chest heavy with medals from conflicts spanning 30 years. Their eyes met briefly as Thomas passed the general, giving an almost imperceptible nod. His presence sent a clear message: whatever happened here today had official, if unofficial, Earth sanction. Thomas climbed the steps to the dais, standing before Alara and Lumina. The hall fell silent as Alara raised her hands, addressing the gathering in the melodic language of the Stellaris. Thomas recognized it as a formal invocation, though he couldn't understand the words. A translator nearby murmured the English equivalent: "We gather today to honor an ancient tradition, the binding of the Valorian, in which a protector is recognized for their selfless courage in defense of a child." Ilara switched to perfect English, her voice carrying throughout the hall. "Thomas Riley of Earth, 3 days ago, you placed yourself between my daughter and those who would harm her. Without hesitation, without thought for your own safety, you stood as her shield. Such actions speak to the character of both an individual and their species." She turned to address the wider assembly. "Many among you still view humans as newcomers to the galactic community, untested, unproven. Yet time and again they have demonstrated courage that belies their short time among the stars. Thomas Riley embodies the best qualities of his people: protection of the innocent, self-sacrifice, and unwavering resolve in the face of overwhelming odds." Thomas stood at parade rest, uncomfortable with the praise but maintaining his composure. He hadn't done anything special, just what any decent person should do when a child was in danger. Lumina stepped forward, holding a silver circlet inlaid with blue crystals. Alara took it from her daughter's hands and continued the ceremony. "In the tradition of our people, the Valorian bond creates a sacred connection between protector and protected. It is not entered into lightly, for it carries both privileges and responsibilities." She looked directly at Thomas. "Are you willing to accept this bond, knowing it marks you as guardian to my daughter in the eyes of all Stellaris?" Thomas glanced at Lumina, whose hopeful expression made the decision simple. "I am," he answered firmly. "Then kneel, Thomas Riley of Earth, that you may rise as Valorian." Thomas lowered himself to one knee, his still healing body protesting the movement. Alara placed the silver circlet on his bowed head. The metal felt cool against his skin for a moment, then warmed rapidly, almost seeming to pulse with energy. "With this crown of protection, I name you Valorian to Lumina Starlight," Alara proclaimed. "May your courage never waver, your resolve never falter, and your protection never fail." Lumina approached, carrying a silver bracelet that matched the circlet. With solemn ceremony that belied her young age, she fastened it around Thomas's right wrist. "I accept you as my Valorian," she said in clear, precise English. "I trust in your protection and honor your sacrifice." The bracelet tightened slightly, conforming perfectly to his wrist. Thomas felt an odd sensation, a subtle connection forming between himself and the child, an awareness of her presence that transcended ordinary perception. "Rise, Valorian, and be recognized," Alara commanded. Thomas stood the hall, erupting in approving sounds from a dozen different species. The Stellaris in attendance touched their foreheads and then extended their hands toward him, a gesture of respect he had never seen them offer to any human before. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded, dignitaries moved forward to offer congratulations. General Stone approached, shaking Thomas's hand firmly. "Captain," he said quietly, using the rank Thomas had once held, "you've managed to make quite an impression." "This wasn't my intention," Thomas replied under his breath. Stone chuckled. "It never is with you. But intentions aside, you've accomplished something significant today. This is the first Valorian ceremony ever granted to a human. You've opened diplomatic doors that might prove valuable in the future." "I'm not a diplomat," Thomas countered. "No," Stone agreed. "You're something potentially more valuable, a symbol." He glanced toward Alara and Lumina, who were accepting felicitations from other dignitaries. "That bracelet, by the way, is more than ceremonial. Stellaris technology is woven into it, allows you to sense if Lumina is in danger no matter the distance. Works both ways, too." Thomas looked down at the silver band with newfound appreciation. "Military applications." "Considerable," Stone confirmed. "But that's not why you're wearing it, is it?" Before Thomas could respond, alarms blared throughout the complex. Red emergency lights began flashing, and the station's AI voice echoed through the hall. "Security alert. Unidentified vessels approaching Frontier Point perimeter. All civilians proceed to designated shelter areas. Security personnel to defensive positions." This is not a drill. The assembly erupted in controlled chaos. Dignitaries were quickly escorted towards safety by their security details. Alara immediately shifted from ceremonial figure to military commander barking orders to her personnel. Orbital defense grid active. Scramble interceptors. I want identification on those vessels immediately. A communications officer approached her, speaking urgently. Commander, we've identified the lead ship. It's the Shadowblade Thorax's personal vessel. Alara's expression hardened. How many ships total? 5 combat-class vessels heavily armed. She turned to Thomas, who had already moved to Lumina's side, positioning himself protectively near the child. It seems the ceremony was timely, Valorian. Your services are required sooner than expected. Thomas nodded grimly, decades of combat experience clicking into place. Get Lumina to safety. I'll coordinate with Earth security forces. No, Ilara countered. Lumina stays with you. You're her Valorian now. Where she goes, you go. I must command our defense. She knelt quickly beside her daughter. Stay with Thomas, little one. Do exactly as he says. He will protect you. Lumina nodded bravely, though fear shimmered in her violet eyes. Be careful, mother. Alara touched her forehead to her daughter's, a Stellaris gesture of affection, before rising to her full height. To Thomas, she said, the secure bunkers on level B3 are your destination. The bracelet will grant you access to Stellaris protected areas. Trust no one you don't personally know. Understood, Thomas replied, military crispness returning to his voice. Alara hesitated a moment longer, studying the human who had become entwined with her family's fate through one act of courage. Protect her with your life, Thomas Riley. I will, he promised, the words carrying the weight of an oath. As Alara departed with her command staff, General Stone approached Thomas. I'm heading to the Earth Defense Coordination Center. We have ships launching to intercept, but they'll take time to arrive. He handed Thomas a small communication device. Secure channel old encryption. Use it if you need me. Thomas accepted the device with a nod of thanks, tucking it into his pocket. Keep your head down, General. Stone smiled grimly. You're the one they want, Tom. Don't make your resurrection temporary. As the general departed, Thomas turned to Lumina, who looked up at him with complete trust despite the chaos erupting around them. He knelt to her level, his voice gentle but firm. We're going somewhere safe, but we need to move quickly and quietly. Can you do that? She nodded solemnly. Yes, Valorian. Call me Thomas, he said, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation. Thomas? She repeated the name, sounding musical in her Stellaris accent. Together they slipped away from the ceremonial hall, Thomas already plotting the safest route to the secure bunkers. The security bracelet on his wrist hummed with energy, a constant reminder of his new responsibility. As they navigated the increasingly frantic corridors of Frontier Point, emergency announcements continued to echo through the facility. Outside, the first exchanges of weapons fire lit up the Arizona sky, brilliant flashes visible through the transparent dome overhead. The Vexian attack had begun, and with it, Thomas Riley's first test as Valorian. The journey to the secure bunkers quickly became a gauntlet of obstacles. Frontier Point's corridors teemed with panicked civilians and harried security personnel. Overhead announcements reported Vexian boarding parties breaching the outer defenses. Thomas guided Lumina through service passages and maintenance tunnels, avoiding the main thoroughfares where they would be exposed and vulnerable. How do you know these paths? Lumina asked as they slipped through a narrow utility corridor that wasn't on public maps. Part of my job, Thomas replied, omitting that his security position had been the perfect cover for mapping escape routes, a habit from his military days he'd never abandoned. They paused at a junction, Thomas listening intently for any signs of pursuit. The distant sound of energy weapons and shouting carried through the ventilation system. The Vexians were inside the complex and spreading throughout the structure. They're looking for us, aren't they? Lumina asked, her voice small but remarkably composed for a child her age. Thomas saw no point in lying. Yes, but they won't find us. The silver bracelet on his wrist suddenly pulsed with warmth. At the same moment, Lumina gasped, her eyes widening. Someone's coming, she whispered. Thomas hadn't heard anything, but he didn't question the warning. The Valorian bond was clearly more than ceremonial. It created some form of shared awareness between them. He quickly ushered Lumina into a maintenance alcove, positioning himself protectively in front of her. Moments later, heavy footsteps approached from the connecting passage. 2 Vexian soldiers appeared, their gray skin almost luminous in the dimmed emergency lighting. They carried energy rifles and moved with the precision of trained combatants. Thomas remained perfectly still, hoping the shadows would conceal them. His hand moved silently to the utility knife at his belt, a poor substitute for a proper weapon, but better than nothing. The lead Vexian paused his head, turning toward their hiding place. Enhanced senses, Thomas realized. They can detect us somehow. Human and Stellaris child, the Vexian growled to his companion. Confirmed. They raised their weapons. Thomas had seconds to act. With practiced motion, he flicked the utility knife directly at the lead Vexian's throat, the species' most vulnerable point. The blade struck true, embedding itself in the soft tissue beneath the alien's jaw. As the first Vexian fell, Thomas was already in motion, launching himself at the second attacker. The Vexian fired, but Thomas had anticipated the shot, rolling beneath the energy beam that scorched the wall behind him. He crashed into the alien's legs, toppling the much larger being. They grappled briefly before Thomas managed to wrench the energy rifle away, swinging the weapon stock in a vicious arc that connected with the Vexian's temple. The alien collapsed unconscious or dead. Thomas didn't check which. He retrieved his knife, wiped it clean, and returned to Lumina, who watched with wide eyes. "You're not just a security guard," she said softly, a statement rather than a question. Thomas checked the Vexian energy rifle, familiarizing himself with its controls. "Not anymore," he answered, offering no further explanation. "We need to keep moving. More will come." As they continued through the maintenance passages, Thomas noticed Lumina studying him with newfound awareness. Children often saw through deceptions that fooled adults, perceiving the essential truth of a person beneath their carefully constructed facades. "My mother knows what you really are," Lumina said as they descended a utility ladder to a lower level. "That's why she chose you as my Valorian." Thomas helped her down the final rungs. "Your mother is a smart woman. She said you remind her of warriors from our history, the kind who fight not because they want to, but because they must." Lumina's violet eyes studied him with unsettling perception. "You've seen many battles before, haven't you?" Thomas hesitated before answering. "Yes," he admitted finally, "more than I care to remember." They reached a sealed door marked with Stellaris symbols. The security panel pulsed with blue light, scanning Thomas's bracelet before the heavy door hissed open, revealing a long corridor leading to the secure bunkers. They had almost reached safety. An explosion rocked the facility, the concussion wave nearly knocking them off their feet. Emergency lighting flickered momentarily before stabilizing. Thomas steadied Lumina, concern etched on his weathered face. "That came from the defense center," he said grimly. Lumina's expression filled with fear. "Mother is there." Thomas checked the secure channel device General Stone had given him. No communications were getting through. The explosion had likely damaged the transmission systems. He faced a critical decision: continue to the bunker as instructed or investigate the explosion. Military training urged the former. His mission was to protect Lumina, and the safest place for her was the bunker. Yet the Valorian bracelet on his wrist pulsed with an almost sentient urgency, as if responding to the child's distress. "We need to find out if your mother is safe," Thomas decided, knowing Alara would likely disapprove but unable to ignore Lumina's desperate concern. "But you stay right beside me, understood? No wandering off, no hesitation when I give an order." Lumina nodded solemnly. "I promise." They changed course, heading toward the defense center. Thomas moved cautiously, the Vexian rifle ready in his hands. The corridor showed increasing signs of battle scorch marks from energy weapons, abandoned equipment, and occasionally the still forms of security personnel who had fallen defending the station. Thomas kept Lumina's eyes averted from the worst sights, but the reality of war couldn't be entirely hidden. She remained stoic, her small hand clutching the edge of his uniform as they navigated the aftermath of violence. As they approached the defense center, the sounds of ongoing combat grew louder. Energy weapons discharged, orders were shouted in multiple languages, and the unmistakable chaos of close-quarters battle filled the air. Thomas stopped at a security junction, checking the monitors that showed the interior of the defense center. What he saw caused his blood to run cold. Vexian forces had breached the command post. Earth and Stellaris personnel fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. In the center of the chaos stood a massive Vexian warrior, nearly a head taller than his companions, his armor adorned with trophies from fallen enemies. "Thorax," Lumina whispered, recognizing the warlord from briefings she had undoubtedly overheard. Thomas scanned the monitors, frantically searching for Alara. He found her commanding a last defensive position, her silver-blue uniform stained with what appeared to be both Vexian and Stellaris blood. She fought with the precision of a trained warrior, but her position was being overwhelmed. "Stay here," Thomas instructed Lumina, placing her in a secured monitoring alcove. "If I don't return in 10 minutes, use this." He handed her Stone's communication device. "Press this button and speak clearly. Help will come." Lumina clutched the device, her eyes wide with fear and determination. "You're going to help, Mother." It wasn't a question, but Thomas nodded anyway. "I am." "The ancient texts say a true Valorian can sense their charge across any distance," Lumina said, touching her own bracelet. "I'll know if you need me." Thomas smiled despite the gravity of the situation. "Just stay safe, that's your only job right now." He checked the Vexian rifle one last time, calculating angles of approach and points of entry. The defense center had multiple access points, but most would be heavily guarded. Thomas needed a route no one would expect: the ventilation system. Military installations on Earth often had ventilation ducts large enough for personnel to access during emergencies. Frontier Point, designed with multiple species in mind, had even larger systems. Thomas located an access panel and removed it quietly, revealing a duct large enough for him to navigate in a crouch. 10 minutes, he reminded Lumina. Not 1 second longer. She nodded, her small face a mask of determination that reminded him painfully of children he had seen in war zones across Earth, too young to understand the full horrors around them, yet somehow finding courage beyond their years. Thomas entered the ventilation system, navigating by memory toward the defense center. The sounds of battle grew louder as he approached. Through grates, he could glimpse fragments of the ongoing fight: Vexian soldiers securing positions, wounded defenders being executed, Thorax himself striding through the carnage like a dark god of war. Finally, Thomas positioned himself above a section near Alara's last defensive position. Through the grate, he could see her and a handful of survivors, both human and Stellaris, holding a rapidly shrinking perimeter. They were surrounded, outgunned, and moments from being overrun. Thomas removed the grate, silently took aim with the Vexian rifle, and announced his presence with a precisely targeted volley that dropped 3 enemy soldiers instantly. The unexpected attack from above created momentary confusion among the Vexian forces, exactly what he needed. Thomas dropped from the ventilation duct, landing behind Alara's position. The commander spun toward him, weapon raised before recognition dawned in her violet eyes. "Valorian," she gasped, surprise and relief warring in her expression. "Lumina. Safe," Thomas assured her, taking position at her side and continuing to fire at the regrouping Vexians. "For now." Alara nodded her understanding, immediately refocusing on the battle. No time for gratitude or questions. They were soldiers in the midst of combat. Words could come later if they survived. "Thorax wants the command codes for our defense grid," she explained between bursts of fire. "If he gets them, he can disable our entire planetary defense system." Thomas assessed their dire situation with the cold calculation of a veteran. They were outnumbered at least 5-1, with more Vexian forces likely en route. Conventional tactics offered no path to victory. "We need an exit strategy," he stated, picking off another Vexian who ventured too close to their position. "The auxiliary control room," Alara replied, "3 levels down. If we can reach it, we can lock down the defense grid and evacuate through the emergency tunnels." Thomas nodded, formulating a plan. "On my signal, fall back to that door." He indicated a heavy blast door behind their position. "I'll cover you." Alara looked at him sharply. "You'll be overrun. Just be ready to open that door the instant I reach it." Thomas replied, his tone brooking no argument. Before she could protest further, Thomas broke from cover, firing with deadly precision as he charged toward an abandoned weapons cart. The audacity of the move caught the Vexians by surprise. Thomas reached the cart, overturned it for cover, and continued laying down suppressive fire. "Fall back now," he shouted to Alara and her remaining forces. They moved immediately, disciplined despite their desperation. Thomas provided covering fire, his years of combat experience evident in every calculated shot. He wasn't a young man anymore, but muscle memory and ingrained tactical awareness compensated for diminished speed and strength. From across the command center, Thorax himself finally took notice of the human who had disrupted his victory. The massive Vexian warlord locked eyes with Thomas, recognition dawning on his alien features. "The Valorian," Thorax growled, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "The human who interfered once before." Thomas ignored the taunt, continuing to provide cover as Alara's forces reached the blast door. Only when they were safely positioned did he begin his own retreat, moving from cover to cover with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned operator. He was halfway to the door when a searing pain tore through his left shoulder. A Vexian energy beam had found its mark, burning through flesh and muscle. Thomas staggered but kept moving, switching the rifle to his uninjured arm without breaking stride. Alara had the blast door open, providing covering fire as Thomas made his final approach. He could feel Thorax's presence behind him, a predatory awareness that had saved his life in countless battles before. Thomas dove through the doorway just as a massive energy blast scorched the space he had occupied a split second earlier. Alara slammed her fist on the emergency closure control, and the blast door descended with agonizing slowness. In the narrowing gap, Thomas caught a final glimpse of Thorax. The Vexian warlord's yellow eyes burned with recognition and hatred. "I know you now, human," Thorax called through the diminishing opening. "You cannot hide the warrior beneath the Guardian's mask. When next we meet, I will take everything from you as you have taken from me." The blast door sealed with a definitive thud, cutting off the warlord's final words. Emergency containment shields hummed to life, securing their position temporarily. Thomas leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, blood flowing freely from his shoulder wound. Alara immediately moved to examine the injury, her commander's discipline giving way to genuine concern. "You need medical attention," she stated, applying pressure to the wound. "Later," Thomas replied, wincing as he straightened. "We need to move. That door won't hold them long." Alara studied him with newfound respect. "You came back for me. Why your duty was to protect Lumina?" Thomas met her gaze steadily. "Lumina needs her mother, and I've never been good at abandoning people who fight alongside me." Something unspoken passed between them, a mutual recognition between warriors who understood sacrifice and duty. Alara nodded once, acceptance and gratitude conveyed without words. "The auxiliary control room," she said, returning to the immediate tactical situation. "This way." As they moved through the emergency corridors with the remaining defenders, alarms continued to sound throughout Frontier Point. Outside, the battle between Vexian ships and Earth's defensive force had raged on, visible through occasional viewport glimpses as flashes of destructive energy against the desert night. Thomas's thoughts remained fixed on Lumina, waiting alone in the monitoring alcove. The Valorian bracelet on his wrist hummed steadily, confirming she remained safe for the moment. But time was running out. He had promised to return in 10 minutes. That deadline had already passed. The auxiliary control room hummed with emergency power as Alara's fingers danced across holographic interfaces, locking down critical defense systems before the Vexians could breach them. Thomas stood guard at the entrance, the energy rifle he'd claimed steady in his hands despite the burning pain in his shoulder. The wound had been hastily treated with Stellaris medical technology, enough to stop the bleeding, but far from healed. "How much longer?" Thomas asked, his voice taut with urgency. Every minute that passed was another minute Lumina waited alone. "Almost done," Alara replied without looking up from her task. "The primary defense grid is secure. They cannot access our planetary shields now." She inputted a final command sequence, and the holographic display flashed confirmation. "There. Even if they take the station, Earth remains protected." Thomas checked the Valorian bracelet on his wrist. It pulsed steadily, reassuring him that Lumina remained safe, but he could sense her growing anxiety through their bond. "We need to get back to your daughter." Alara nodded, gathering the few remaining members of her command staff. "The emergency tunnels will lead us to evacuation point B. From there we can access the secure bunkers and find Lumina." As they prepared to move out, the facility's communication system crackled to life. A deep, gravelly voice echoed through the speakers, unmistakably Vexian, but speaking perfect English. "Commander Starlight," the voice intoned. "This is Thorax Shadowbane. Your position is surrounded. We have disabled the emergency tunnels. Surrender the defense codes now, or watch as I execute your personnel one by one." Alara's face remained impassive, but Thomas could see the calculation in her violet eyes. "He's bluffing about the tunnels," she whispered. "Our internal sensors would have alerted us to any breach." "But he's not bluffing about the executions," Thomas replied grimly. He had seen the merciless efficiency of the Vexian forces firsthand. The communication system crackled again. "Your time expires in 3 minutes, Commander. And to the human Valorian hiding with her, your absence has been noted. The child waits alone. Thomas felt his blood run cold. He knows about Lumina. Alara's composure faltered for the first time. How could he? The Vexians we encountered earlier, Thomas realized. Before I neutralized them, they must have reported our position. The weight of this revelation hung heavy between them. If Thorax knew Lumina was alone and vulnerable, she would become his primary target, both as leverage against her mother and as vengeance against Thomas. I need to get to her now, Thomas said, already moving toward the exit. Wait! Alara caught his arm. We need a diversion, something to draw Thorax's forces away from wherever Lumina is hiding. Before they could formulate the plan, the auxiliary control room's emergency hatch, a secondary exit they had secured upon arrival, began to cycle open. Thomas immediately pushed Alara behind him, weapon raised, and aimed at the slowly opening door. Instead of Vexian soldiers, a single figure slipped through the narrow opening. Thomas nearly fired before registering the unexpected sight, a Vexian but smaller than the warriors they had encountered, with lighter gray skin, marked with distinctive blue patterns. Most surprisingly, the alien wore no armor, only simple civilian clothing. Don't shoot, the Vexian said in heavily accented English, raising empty hands in surrender. I come to help. Vrax, Alara said in recognition, lowering her weapon slightly. What are you doing here? Warning you, the Vexian Vrax replied urgently. Thorax has deployed scan teams throughout the station. They search for the child. He knows she is your weakness. Thomas kept his weapon short, trained on the newcomer. Why would you betray your own kind? Vrax's yellow eyes met Thomas's unflinchingly. Not all Vexians support Thorax's vendetta. Some of us seek peace, not endless war. He turned to Alara. Commander, I served as cultural liaison between our peoples before this conflict. You know I have always advocated for cooperation. Alara nodded slowly. He has. Vrax was instrumental in negotiating the Centauri Accords 3 cycles ago. Thomas remained skeptical. Convenient timing for a peace advocate to appear. Not convenient, necessary, Vrax countered. Thorax has gone too far. Attacking a diplomatic station, targeting a child, these actions dishonor all Vexian. Some of us have formed a resistance. We seek to end his control of our government. And we should trust you because... Thomas let the question hang in the air. Vrax reached slowly into his garment, careful to telegraph his movements. He withdrew a small data crystal, offering it to Alara. Tactical information. Thorax's ship deployments, security codes, and, most importantly, the location of his forces within this facility. Alara took the crystal, inserting it into her command terminal. Data streams immediately projected into the air before them, detailed in schematics of Frontier Point with Vexian positions clearly marked. If this information is accurate, she said, studying the display, Thorax has committed nearly 70% of his forces to securing the main command center and surrounding areas, which means fewer guards near the secure bunkers. Thomas observed, his tactical mind already processing the implications. Yes, Vrax confirmed, but he has sent specialized hunters to find your child. They are moving methodically through the maintenance sections now. Thomas checked his bracelet again. The pulse remained steady, but he couldn't shake the sense that time was running dangerously short. We need to move now. There is more, Vrax said. Thorax knows about you, human. One of his commanders recognized your fighting techniques from historical records. They believe you are former Earth Special Forces, possibly from the desert conflicts of your past century. The revelation didn't surprise Thomas. His cover had been thin at best, especially after displaying combat skills far beyond those of an ordinary security guard. Does that change anything? He asked Alara. She shook her head. Not our immediate objective. We get to Lumina, then evacuate to the Stellaris consulate section. It has independent defenses that could hold until reinforcements arrive. I can guide you through service corridors not yet secured by Thorax's forces, Vrax offered. There is a path that avoids their main concentration. Thomas exchanged a look with Alara. The decision to trust the Vexian defector could determine whether they reach Lumina in time. In the end, they had little choice. Every moment of debate was another moment Lumina remained in danger. Lead the way, Thomas said finally, but know this, if this is a trap, you'll be the first to die. Vrax nodded, accepting the terms without offense. I would expect nothing less from a Valorian. They moved out in formation, Vrax guiding them through rarely used maintenance passageways. Thomas remained vigilant, watching their guide for any sign of deception while simultaneously monitoring their surroundings for threats. Decades of combat experience had honed his situational awareness to near supernatural levels. As they navigated the dimly lit corridors, Vrax spoke softly. Your actions protecting the Stellaris child have become known throughout the station human. Many find it surprising. Why? Thomas asked, his voice equally quiet. Because humans aren't supposed to care about alien children. Because warriors rarely reveal their true nature when in hiding, Vrax replied. You sacrificed your anonymity to save another. Among my people, such actions are considered either great wisdom or great foolishness. And what do you consider it? Ilara asked from behind them. Vrax's facial ridges shifted in what might have been a smile. I consider it the reason I chose to help you. One who protects children might also protect a future of peace between our worlds. They paused at an intersection, Vrax consulting an internal map projected through a small device on his wrist. The monitoring alcove where you left the child is 2 levels up from here. We can access it through the emergency lift shafts. Thomas felt the Valorian bracelet warm slightly on his wrist. She's moving, he said suddenly. Ilara looked at him sharply. What? Lumina, she's no longer in the alcove. Thomas focused on the sensation coming through the bond. She's ascending, moving toward the upper levels. How can you know this? Vrax asked, clearly fascinated by the Valorian bond. Thomas ignored the question. We need to change course, now. Ilara nodded immediately, trusting his assessment. The upper levels are being evacuated. She might be trying to reach one of the escape pods. Or she might have been found, Thomas said grimly, voicing their shared fear. They altered their route, following Thomas's intuitive sense of Lumina's direction. The bond between Valorian and Charge grew stronger with use, guiding him through the labyrinthine structure with increasing precision. They climbed through emergency access ways, avoiding the main corridors where Vexian patrols were most likely to be encountered. As they neared the upper levels, the sounds of distant combat reached them. Energy weapons discharging orders shouted in multiple languages, the chaos of battle. Earth's security forces had regrouped and were engaging the Vexian invaders throughout the complex. Wait, Thomas whispered, raising a hand to halt their progress. They had reached a junction leading to the main evacuation corridor. Something's wrong. The Valorian bracelet pulsed with an unfamiliar pattern. Not danger exactly, but something unsettling. Thomas concentrated on the sensation, trying to interpret what Lumina might be experiencing. She's afraid, he said finally, but not in immediate danger. She's hiding, watching something or someone. Ilara closed her eyes briefly, a mother's concern visible beneath her commander's composure. Can you tell where exactly? Thomas pointed toward a side passage. That way. Close now. They moved cautiously, weapons ready. The corridor ahead opened into one of Frontier Point's botanical gardens, spaces designed to provide psychological comfort to species from worlds with abundant plant life. Under normal circumstances, the garden would be a peaceful sanctuary. Now it offered countless hiding places among exotic flora from a dozen worlds. The Valorian bracelet grew warmer still, confirming they were close. Thomas scanned the dense vegetation, seeking any sign of movement. A flash of silver blue caught his eye, a glimpse of Stellaris skin among Earth-native ferns. Lumina was there, crouched behind a massive plant with broad protective leaves. Thomas signaled to Ilara, indicating the location. She nodded, understanding his silent communication with the ease of a fellow soldier. They began to approach, cautiously wary of potential traps or observers. Before they could reach her, Lumina's voice cut through the artificial forest. Stay back, they're here. The warning came seconds before energy beams sliced through the vegetation around them. Thomas dove for cover, pulling Ilara down with him, as superheated particles scorched the air above their heads. Vrax flattened himself behind a massive tree trunk, narrowly avoiding being cut in half by the concentrated fire. Vexian hunters, Vrax called out. Elite trackers, they must have followed the child. Thomas assessed their situation with cold precision. At least 3 attackers, possibly more, using the dense foliage for cover just as they were. Lumina remained hidden but surrounded, caught between the hunters and their position. Ilara, he said quietly, when I move, get to Lumina. Don't stop for anything. The Stellaris commander nodded, once understanding immediately. Be careful, Valorian. When Thomas took a deep breath, focusing his mind as he had done countless times in combat zones across Earth. Age might have slowed his body, but experience had given him something far more valuable, the ability to calculate risk with perfect clarity. He erupted from cover firing in three different directions, creating a chaotic spray of energy that forced the hidden Vexian hunters to duck behind their own cover. The distraction worked exactly as intended, giving Alara the opportunity to sprint toward Lumina's position. Thomas continued his assault, drawing all attention to himself as he moved from cover to cover with practiced efficiency. A Vexian hunter rose to target Alara, but Thomas's shot caught him squarely in the chest before he could fire. Another emerged to Thomas's left, and he rolled beneath the alien's attack, coming up firing. Through it all, the Valorian bracelet pulsed strongly, feeding him information about Lumina's position and emotional state. She was still afraid, but now hopeful as her mother approached. Suddenly, Vrax moved from his hiding place, calling out in the guttural Vexian language. The remaining hunters hesitated clearly, surprised to see one of their own among the enemy. Vrax continued speaking rapidly, his hands making formal gestures that Thomas didn't recognize but suspected were significant in Vexian culture. The moment of confusion was all they needed. Alara reached Lumina, gathering her daughter into her arms before retreating toward Thomas's position. The reunion was brief but intense, Lumina clinging to her mother with desperate relief. The human kept his promise, Lumina said, her eyes finding Thomas across the garden. He came back for me. Of course he did, Alara replied, smoothing her daughter's hair. He is your Valorian. The touching moment was short-lived. One of the Vexian hunters, apparently unswayed by Vrax's appeals, emerged from hiding with weapon raised. Thomas fired immediately, but the hunter was already moving, diving toward Vrax with murderous intent. Traitor, the hunter snarled, tackling the smaller Vexian to the ground. Thomas couldn't get a clear shot as the two aliens grappled. Vrax was clearly outmatched, his civilian physique no match for the trained hunter. The larger Vexian pinned him, energy blade materializing from a wrist gauntlet. Before Thomas could intervene, Vrax somehow twisted free, using the hunter's momentum against him. The move wasn't random chance, it was the practiced technique of someone with combat training beyond what he had claimed. You're not just a cultural liaison, Thomas realized aloud, watching as Vrax efficiently disabled his larger opponent with precise strikes to nerve centers. Vrax looked up, yellow eyes meeting Thomas's across the garden. And you are not just a security guard, he countered. We all have our secrets, Valorian. The remaining hunters had retreated, likely to regroup and call for reinforcements. Their window of safety would be brief. Alara approached with Lumina clutching her hand tightly. The evacuation route to the Stellaris consulate is through the North Corridor, she said. If we hurry, we can reach it before they regroup. Thomas nodded, but his attention remained on Vrax. You have combat training, specialized training. The Vexian's facial ridges shifted in what might have been resignation. I was military intelligence for becoming a liaison. Those skills never truly leave you. It was an explanation Thomas understood all too well. So your resistance movement is real, Vrax assured them, though perhaps not as organized as I implied. There are many Vexian who oppose Thorax's obsession with vengeance against the Stellaris, but few willing to act openly against him. Yet you did, Alara observed. Because someone must stand first if others are to follow, Vrax replied simply. Lumina stepped forward, violet eyes studying the Vexian with childlike directness. You helped save me. Does that make you a Valorian too? The innocent question seemed to catch Vrax by surprise. He blinked several times before responding. No, little one. That is a sacred title reserved for your people and those they choose. He glanced at Thomas. But perhaps it represents an ideal all species should aspire to: protection of the innocent despite personal risk. Thomas recognized the philosophical depth behind the statement. This Vexian was far more than he appeared. We should move, he said, returning to the immediate tactical situation. The longer we remain here, the greater the chance we'll be discovered. They proceeded toward the evacuation route, Thomas taking point while Vrax covered their rear. Alara kept Lumina close between them, her military training evident in every movement, despite her maternal concern. They moved as a unit, coordinating without words, like soldiers who had fought together for years rather than allies of convenience thrown together by circumstance. As they approached the final corridor leading to the Stellaris consulate, Thomas's combat instincts flared in warning. He raised a hand, halting the group. Something's wrong, he whispered. It's too quiet. The corridor ahead stretched empty and silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed the rest of the facility. No emergency personnel, no evacuees, no signs of battle. The stillness felt artificial, controlled. Ambush, Vrax confirmed softly. Thorax would not leave the path to your consulate unguarded. Elara studied the corridor with a commander's tactical eye. We have no alternative route. The other access points were sealed during the initial attack. Thomas assessed their limited options. Going back meant certain capture or death. Going forward meant likely walking into a trap. Neither choice was acceptable when Lumina's safety hung in the balance. There's always another way, he said, conviction born from decades of impossible missions. He studied the surrounding area until his gaze settled on a maintenance panel near the ceiling. The environmental control system. Vrax followed his line of sight. The air circulation ducts, they would be too small for adults. Not for all of us, Thomas replied, looking meaningfully at Lumina. Understanding dawned in Alara's eyes. No, she said immediately. Absolutely not. It's our best option, Thomas insisted. The ducts will lead directly into the Stellaris consulate. Lumina can crawl through and alert your security forces to our position. I am not sending my daughter alone through hostile territory, Alara stated firmly. She won't be alone, Thomas said, touching the Valorian bracelet. I'll know exactly where she is every moment. I'll sense any danger before it happens. He knelt to Lumina's level. But it's your choice, Lumina. No one will force you. The child looked between her mother and her Valorian, conflicting emotions playing across her young face. Fear warred with determination, trust with uncertainty. Finally, she straightened her shoulders in a gesture reminiscent of her mother's military bearing. I'll do it, she said, her voice small but resolute. I can be brave like you, Thomas. Alara clearly wanted to protest further, but her commander's rationality overtook her maternal instincts. She knelt beside her daughter, clasping her small shoulders. Listen carefully, Lumina. Once inside the consulate, find Security Chief Zarin. Tell him exactly where we are and that we need immediate extraction. Do you understand? Lumina nodded solemnly. Find Chief Zarin. Tell him where you are. Bring help. Thomas lifted her to the maintenance panel which Vrax had quietly opened while they talked. The duct beyond was narrow but navigable for someone Lumina's size. Follow this straight ahead until you reach a junction, Thomas instructed. Then take the right path. It leads directly to the consulate's main hall. How do you know that? Alara asked. I memorized the station schematics my first week here, Thomas replied matter-of-factly. Standard procedure for special forces. Vrax finished for him, a new respect in his alien eyes. Thomas ignored the comment, focusing instead on Lumina. The bracelet will guide you. If you feel it grow cold, stop immediately. It means danger ahead. If it grows warm, you're on the right path. Lumina touched her own bracelet, identical to the one on Thomas's wrist. I understand. We'll be right behind you, Thomas promised, just on a different path. With one last look at her mother, Lumina crawled into the duct and disappeared from view. The moment she was gone, Alara turned to Thomas, violet eyes blazing. If anything happens to her, it won't, Thomas stated with absolute certainty. The Valorian bond works both ways. I would know instantly if she encountered danger. Alara studied him intently before nodding once acceptance rather than agreement. Then we proceed to the rendezvous point and prepare to fight our way through if necessary. They moved toward the suspiciously empty corridor, weapons ready. Thomas took point, senses hyper-alert for any sign of the trap they all knew awaited them. Through the Valorian bracelet, he monitored Lumina's progress, feeling her determination and fear as she navigated the narrow ducts above them. They were halfway down the corridor when the trap was sprung. Concealed panels slid open along the walls, revealing Vexian soldiers with weapons trained on their position. From the far end of the corridor, a massive figure emerged, Thorax himself, his imposing form adorned with battle trophies and ceremonial armor. Commander Starlight, the Vexian warlord intoned, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the distance. How predictable you would run to your people's sanctuary. His yellow eyes shifted to Thomas, and the human Valorian still playing guardian. Finally, his gaze settled on Vrax. But this is an unexpected development. One of my own, a traitor to his blood. The only traitor to our people is you, Thorax, Vrax replied, standing tall despite being dwarfed by the warlord. Your vendetta dishonors the Vexian code. We were once warriors with purpose, not murderers of children. Thorax's expression darkened. You speak of honor while standing with our enemies, the Stellaris who slaughtered our forces at the Battle of Drexus Prime, who killed my son. Your son died in honorable combat during a war you helped start, Alara countered. I commanded those forces, yes, but I never targeted him specifically. He fought bravely to the end. Thomas remained silent, assessing their tactical situation while the others spoke. 12 Vexian soldiers visible, likely more concealed. Thorax himself would be a formidable opponent. Their chances of fighting through were virtually non-existent, but he had faced worse odds before. More importantly, he could feel Lumina's steady progress through the ducts above. She had reached the junction and turned right as instructed. Soon she would be safely inside the Stellaris consulate. They just needed to buy her enough time. Where is the child? Thorax demanded suddenly, his gaze sweeping their small group. Where is your daughter, Commander? Alara's expression remained impassive. Safe from you. Thorax's facial ridges contracted in what Thomas recognized as amusement. No one is safe from me within this facility. My forces control every level, every section. It is only a matter of time until she is found. What do you want, Thorax? Thomas asked, speaking for the first time. This isn't just about revenge. You could have targeted Commander Starlight directly if that were your only goal. The Vexian warlord's attention shifted fully to Thomas Yellow. Eyes narrowing. Perceptive for a human. You are correct, Valorian. Revenge is merely a personal benefit. My true objective is the Harmony Project. Alara tensed beside Thomas, confirming the significance of the name. You know of what I speak, Commander, Thorax continued. The technology your research division has developed, capable of restoring dead worlds to life, or with minor modifications capable of rendering inhabited worlds uninhabitable in moments. It was never designed as a weapon, Alara protested. The Harmony Project is meant to heal planets devastated by war or natural disaster. Any technology powerful enough to create life can be adapted to end it, Thorax countered. The project files are all I require. Provide them, and perhaps I will be merciful. Thomas felt the Valorian bracelet grow suddenly warmer. Lumina had reached the Stellaris consulate. Their window of opportunity was approaching. They just needed to stall a little longer. And if we refuse, Thomas asked, deliberately drawing Thorax's attention away from Alara. Something about the warlord's manner suggested he had particular interest in Thomas, a curiosity that might be exploited. Thorax stepped closer, towering over the human. Then I will start by breaking you, Valorian. Slowly, piece by piece. He leaned down, voice lowering to a near whisper. I know what you are, human, your fighting style, your tactical awareness. You are a warrior hiding as a guardian. Why, what drove a soldier of your caliber to hide among civilians? The question struck uncomfortably close to truths Thomas had buried for years. Perhaps I grew tired of war, he replied evenly. No, Thorax said with unsettling certainty. Warriors like us do not tire of war. It defines us. We may leave the battlefield, but it never truly leaves us. He straightened to his full height. What happened in the desert, human? What broke the soldier and created the guardian? Before Thomas could respond, the corridor shook with a distant explosion. Emergency lighting flickered momentarily before stabilizing. Thorax barked orders to a subordinate who replied with obvious concern. It seems your Stellaris allies have mounted a counterattack, the warlord growled. No matter, we hold the strategic positions. They cannot. A second explosion, much closer this time, cut off his words. The floor beneath them trembled with the impact. Lumina made it, Thomas said to Alara, the Valorian bracelet confirming his assessment. The Stellaris forces are coming for us. Thorax must have reached the same conclusion. His expression darkened with rage. Kill them, he commanded his soldiers. All except the commander. I need her alive. For now. The corridor erupted into chaos as Thorax's command to execute them hung in the air. Thomas reacted instinctively, tackling Alara to the ground as energy beams scorched the space where they had stood seconds before. Vrax dove for cover behind a structural pillar, returning fire with a weapon he had concealed within his clothing. Stay down, Thomas shouted to Alara as he rolled to a defensive position, the Vexian rifle in his hands spitting lethal energy with practiced precision. 3 Vexian soldiers fell in the first exchange, but more poured in from concealed positions. They were drastically outnumbered with only moments before they would be overwhelmed. Thomas fought with the cold efficiency of a veteran Special Forces operator, each shot finding its mark despite the chaos. Through the Valorian bracelet, he felt Lumina's triumph and relief, confirmation that she had reached the Stellaris forces and help was coming. But the question remained whether that help would arrive in time. Another explosion rocked the facility closer than the previous ones. The Stellaris counterattack was gaining ground, systematically fighting toward their position. Thomas could hear the distinctive sound of their energy weapons, different in pitch and resonance from the Vexian arsenal. "Behind me," Vrax called out, gesturing toward a recessed doorway that had been revealed by the latest explosion. "This leads to a maintenance shaft. We can use it to reach the extraction point." Thomas provided covering fire as Alara made her way to the indicated escape route. The commander moved with combat-trained precision, despite her injuries never presenting an easy target to the Vexian attackers. As she reached the doorway, Thomas prepared to follow, still firing, to keep the enemy at bay. He was halfway to safety when a massive energy blast struck the floor directly in his path, sending him sprawling backward. Through the smoke and debris, a towering figure emerged, thorax wielding a heavy energy cannon designed for breaching fortified positions. "Not so fast, Valorian," the warlord growled, the weapon humming, as it recharged for another shot. "Our business is unfinished." Thomas struggled to his feet, the earlier wound in his shoulder reopened by the fall. Blood soaked through his uniform, but he pushed the pain aside with practiced discipline. His own weapon had been knocked from his grasp, leaving him essentially defenseless against the heavily armed and armored warlord. "Go," he shouted to Alara and Vrax. "Get to the extraction point. I'll hold him here." "We're not leaving you," Alara responded, taking aim at Thorax with her own weapon. Before she could fire, the warlord swung his massive cannon toward her. "Drop your weapon, Commander, or the next shot goes through your head." Thomas saw Alara hesitate, calculating odds and alternatives as any good officer would. He caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. Years of battlefield command allowed her to read his intent immediately. She lowered her weapon slowly. "Now back away," Thorax ordered. "This is between the Valorian and me." "Thomas," Alara began, concern evident beneath her military composure. "Go to Lumina," Thomas replied, never taking his eyes off Thorax. "She needs her mother." A tense moment passed between them, mutual respect between warriors acknowledging what might be a final parting. Then Alara backed through the doorway, with Vrax disappearing into the maintenance shaft, as Thorax's soldiers secured the corridor around them. Alone now with the Vexian warlord and his men, Thomas stood his ground. His body ached from accumulated injuries, blood still flowing from his reopened shoulder wound, but his stance remained defiant. He had faced death too many times to fear it now. "Your allies cannot save you," Thorax said, circling Thomas like a predator. "Even now my forces are sealing off this section of the facility. The Stellaris counterattack will arrive only to find your corpse." "You seem awfully interested in one human security guard," Thomas observed, buying time while assessing potential weaknesses in the warlord's armor and positioning. Thorax's facial ridges contracted in what passed for a Vexian smile. "We both know you are far more than that, Thomas Riley. My intelligence agents have been thorough in their research since our first encounter." The use of his full name sent a chill through Thomas. If Thorax had identified him completely, then his carefully constructed cover was irreparably blown. "Captain Thomas Riley, United States Army Special Forces." Thorax continued, confirming Thomas's fears. "Decorated combat veteran of multiple Earth conflicts, including what your people called Operation Desert Storm and the Afghanistan campaign. Presumed killed in action following the Kandahar incident in 2066. Thomas remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the warlord's assertions. "What intrigues me," Thorax said, "is why a warrior of your caliber would abandon his identity to become a faceless security guard on a civilian station." He moved closer, towering over Thomas. "What happened in Kandahar, Captain Riley? What broke you?" The name of that blood-soaked city hit Thomas like a physical blow. For years, he had buried the memories of that day, the impossible choice, the aftermath, the lives lost because of his decision. Now this alien warlord had unearthed his deepest wound with surgical precision. "Nothing broke me," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil within. "I made a choice. I chose humanity over orders." "Ah," Thorax nodded as if a puzzle piece had fallen into place. "You refused to kill." "I refused to kill innocents," Thomas corrected. There's a difference. And for this moral stand, your military discarded you, Thorax observed, cast you aside like a broken tool, yet here you are still fighting, still protecting. The warlord's yellow eyes studied Thomas with unsettling intensity. You and I are not so different, Valorian. Both soldiers betrayed by those we served, both driven by loss. I'm nothing like you, Thomas stated flatly. No, Thorax challenged. My son died because I followed orders without question. Sent to lead an assault I knew was tactically unsound because my superiors demanded it. Commander Starlight's forces cut his squadron to pieces. The warlord's voice roughened with emotion. I learned too late what you discovered in Kandahar, that blindly following orders leads only to destruction. For the first time, Thomas saw beyond the brutal exterior to the wounded father beneath. Thorax's vendetta against Alara wasn't simply the rage of a defeated enemy, it was the grief of a parent who had lost a child. Vengeance won't bring your son back, Thomas said quietly. Targeting Alara's daughter will only perpetuate the cycle. I know, Thorax admitted, surprising Thomas with his candor, but the Harmony Project could prevent such losses in future conflicts. With that technology, we could force peace rather than endless war. Forced peace isn't peace at all, Thomas countered. It's just another form of tyranny. The facility shook with another explosion closer than before. The Stellaris forces were drawing near. Thorax glanced toward the sound, then back to Thomas' decision, crystallizing in his alien features. Enough philosophy, the warlord declared. You stand between me and my objectives, Valorian. For that alone, you must be eliminated. He raised his energy cannon once more. But out of respect for a fellow warrior, I offer you a soldier's death. Face me in combat without weapons or armor. If you somehow defeat me, my forces will stand down. Thomas knew the offer was both genuine and impossible. Thorax outweighed him by at least 100 pounds of muscle, and combat augmentation was decades younger in equivalent age and wasn't suffering from multiple injuries. Yet the alternative was immediate execution where he stood. I accept, Thomas said, straightening despite the pain that lanced through his battered body. Thorax handed his cannon to a subordinate and removed his armored chestplate, revealing the heavily muscled gray torso beneath. The warlord's body bore numerous scars, testament to countless battles across his military career. As Thomas removed his torn security uniform jacket, revealing his own battle-scarred torso, a hushed murmur passed through the watching Vexian soldiers. His body told its own story of wars fought across Earth's troubled regions: Afghanistan, Iraq, Venezuela, Korea. Each scar a mission, each healed fracture, a battle survived. The two warriors circled each other in the cleared space, Thorax's soldiers forming a ring around them. Despite the disparity in size and condition, Thomas moved with the practiced economy of a fighter who had survived against impossible odds before. His eyes never left of the warlord, searching for weaknesses, patterns, anything that might give him the slightest advantage. Thorax struck first, a powerful blow aimed at Thomas's injured shoulder. The human narrowly evaded, countering with a precision strike to a nerve cluster near the Vexian's neck, a vulnerable point in their physiology he had observed during previous encounters. The warlord grunted in surprise as momentary numbness spread through his left arm. You know our weaknesses, he observed, respect evident in his voice. I make it my business to understand potential opponents, Thomas replied, continuing to circle, conserving energy for the moments that mattered most. What followed was not the brutal brawl the Vexian soldiers had expected, but a disciplined exchange between seasoned combatants. Thomas fought defensively, using Thorax's greater mass against him, when possible targeting nerve clusters and pressure points, rather than attempting to match the alien's raw power. For his part, Thorax fought with unexpected restraint, testing Thomas's defenses methodically, rather than overwhelming him with brute force. It was the approach of one professional, recognizing another combat as chess rather than simple violence. Despite Thomas's tactical acumen, the physical reality could not be denied forever. A well-placed strike from Thorax sent him stumbling backward, blood flowing fresh from his reopened wounds. Another blow caught him in the ribs, the crack of breaking bone audible to all observers. Thomas fell to one knee, breathing labored, vision blurring from pain and blood loss. Yet he refused to stay down, forcing himself back to his feet with sheer willpower. Why do you continue? Thorax asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. You cannot win. Your body is failing. What drives you to such futile resistance? Thomas wiped blood from his split lip, eyes never leaving his opponent. Because she's counting on me, he said simply. The child, Thorax, seemed puzzled. She is safely behind Stellaris lines by now. Your duty as Valorian is fulfilled. Not to me, Thomas replied. As long as I draw breath, I'll stand between her and anything that threatens her future. He straightened despite the agony of his broken ribs. Even you. Something shifted in Thorax's expression, recognition, perhaps, or memory. My son said something similar once before his final mission, that he would stand as long as he could draw breath. The warlord's voice grew quieter. I wonder now if I truly honor his memory with this vendetta. Before Thomas could respond, the corridor rocked with the largest explosion yet. Part of the ceiling collapsed, sending debris raining down between the combatants. Through the newly created breach, Stellaris forces poured in weapons targeting the Vexian soldiers. Leading them was Alara, her uniform scorched from battle but her presence commanding as ever. Beside her stood Lumina, her small face set with determination. Behind them, Vrax led a contingent of what appeared to be other Vexian defectors, their uniforms modified to distinguish them from Thorax's forces. Lower your weapons, Alara commanded Thorax's soldiers. You are surrounded. The warlord assessed the tactical situation with a professional's eye, noting that his forces were indeed outflanked and outnumbered by the combined Stellaris and rebel Vexian troops. Yet his focus remained on Thomas, who stood bloodied but unbowed across the rubble-strewn space between them. It seems our duel must remain unfinished, Valorian, Thorax said. Thomas nodded once acknowledgement between warriors. Perhaps that's for the best. Neither of us has anything left to prove. A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to initiate the bloodbath that would surely result if fighting resumed. Into this dangerous stalemate stepped Lumina, slipping past her mother's protective reach before anyone could stop her. The child walked directly into the space between the opposing forces, her small form radiating a courage that belied her years. She stopped halfway between Thomas and Thorax, looking up at the massive warlord without visible fear. You lost your child, she said simply, her clear voice carrying in the sudden silence. That's why you're angry. Thorax stared down at the Stellaris child's surprise, evident in his alien features. Yes, he admitted finally. My son died in battle against your mother's forces. Lumina nodded as if confirming something to herself. My father died in battle too, before I was born. She gestured toward Thomas. That's why I needed a Valorian. Someone to protect me when mother cannot. Her violet eyes remained fixed on Thorax. Wouldn't your son want you to protect children, not hurt them? The simple question, delivered with a child's directness, struck Thorax with visible impact. The warlord's aggressive posture faltered, his facial ridges contracting in what might have been pain or recognition. My son was a warrior, but never a killer of innocence, he said quietly. He fought for the future of our people, for children he would never meet. Then honor him properly, Thomas said, stepping carefully toward Lumina, positioning himself protectively beside her. Not with vengeance, but with the courage to break the cycle of violence. Alara moved forward as well, standing on Lumina's other side. The three of them, Stellaris commander, human, Valorian, and child, presented a unified front that transcended species and conflict. The Harmony Project was never designed as a weapon, Alara stated. Its purpose is to heal worlds devastated by conflict. Worlds like those your people have lost. Thorax, it could restore environments damaged by centuries of warfare, create habitable zones on planets thought forever ruined. If what you say is true, Thorax replied, skepticism evident in his voice. Why keep such technology secret? Why not share it openly? Because we feared exactly this scenario, Alara explained, that someone would see its potential for destruction rather than creation. The power to regenerate ecosystems could, if perverted, be used to transform habitable worlds into uninhabitable ones. Thomas watched understanding dawn in Thorax's eyes. The warlord was intelligent enough to grasp the implications. A technology so powerful could either end wars forever or ensure their continuation on an even more devastating scale. A choice must be made, Thomas said into the silence that followed. The same choice I faced in Kandahar. The same choice you face now. Will you follow the path of destruction or help build something better? Thorax looked between Thomas and Alara, then down to Lumina. The child's unwavering gaze seemed to affect the warlord more profoundly than any weapon could have. In her eyes, perhaps he saw echoes of his own child, of futures lost and possibilities unrealized. After what seemed an eternity, Thorax straightened to his full height and issued a command that stunned his forces. "Lower your weapons," he ordered. "All of you." Confused murmurs passed through the Vexian ranks, but discipline held. One by one, they deactivated their energy rifles and placed them on the ground. "Commander Starlight," Thorax said formally, "I propose a ceasefire effective immediately with negotiations to follow regarding the proper application of the Harmony Project for the benefit of all our worlds." Alara's expression revealed nothing of her surprise at this unexpected turn. Like the professional commander she was, she simply nodded her acceptance. "Agreed, Warlord Thorax. A wise decision." The tension in the corridor gradually dissipated as both sides processed the sudden de-escalation. Stellaris medics moved forward to tend to the wounded, including Thomas, who finally allowed himself to acknowledge the full extent of his injuries now that the immediate danger had passed. As medics guided him to a hovering stretcher, Thomas felt a small hand slip into his. Lumina looked up at him, concern evident in her violet eyes. "You kept your promise, Thomas," she said. "You protected me." "Always will, kid," he replied, voice rough with pain and emotion. "That's what a Valorian does." From across the corridor, Thorax watched this exchange with an expression Thomas couldn't fully interpret. The warlord gave a single respectful nod before turning to confer with his officers about the ceasefire implementation. As the stretcher began to move toward the medical bay, Thomas caught Alara's eye. Something unspoken passed between them. Recognition of what they had accomplished together, and perhaps something more. The Stellaris commander placed her hand briefly on his uninjured shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and connection that transcended words. "Rest now, Valorian," she said softly. "You've earned it." Thomas allowed himself to close his eyes at last, secure in the knowledge that Lumina was safe and a fragile peace had been established. The Valorian bracelet on his wrist pulsed warmly, confirming the bond that had been forged in crisis would endure beyond it. For the first time since Kandahar, Thomas Riley felt something he had almost forgotten, the quiet satisfaction of having made the right choice, whatever the personal cost. 1 week after being discharged from the medical bay, Thomas Riley stood by the window of his apartment, gazing out at the Arizona desert ablaze in the sunset's glow. His wounds had healed, but the marks of battle remained not just on his body, but in his soul. Difficult decisions awaited him, and the time for delay had passed. The Valorian bracelet on his wrist warmed, signaling Lumina's approach before the door chime even sounded. When he opened the door, the child stood there, with Alara both dressed in formal Stellaris attire. Lumina's eyes lit up at seeing Thomas fully recovered, while Alara's gaze held a question they both knew required an answer. "We've come to hear your decision," Alara said simply. Thomas nodded, gesturing them inside. His apartment, once stark and impersonal, now contained a few Stellaris artifacts, gifts from Lumina during his recovery, small pieces of a culture he was gradually embracing. "I've been thinking about your offer," Thomas began, meeting Alara's violet eyes directly. "The soul bond." Lumina watched him expectantly, hope and apprehension warring on her young face. "For most of my life, I've been a soldier," Thomas continued, his voice steady. "Then after Kandahar, I became a ghost, existing, but not living. I thought that was all I deserved." He looked down at the Valorian bracelet glowing softly against his skin. "Until I met you both." He knelt to Lumina's level, his weathered face softening. "You taught me that protecting others isn't just about combat skills or tactical decisions. It's about building something worth protecting." Rising, Thomas turned to Alara. "And you showed me that command isn't just about giving orders, it's about carrying the weight of those decisions and still maintaining compassion." Thomas took a deep breath, his decision crystallizing into certainty. "Yes," he said simply. "I accept the soul bond. I would be honored to become part of your family in spirit and in truth." Lumina's face broke into a radiant smile as she rushed forward, embracing Thomas with unrestrained joy. Alara's composed expression gave way to genuine emotion, her eyes shimmering with feeling too deep for words. "The ceremony will take place in 3 days," she said, her voice carrying the weight of ancient tradition. "There is much to prepare." The grand ceremonial hall of Frontier Point had been transformed for the soul bond ritual. Crystal formations imported from the Stellaris homeworld cast prismatic light across the gathered assembly. Representatives from Earth, Stellaris, and even Vexian stood in concentric circles witnessing this unprecedented union. Thomas stood on the central dais wearing ceremonial robes of midnight blue and silver Stellaris colors, that complemented his human features in unexpected ways. Beside him, Alara was resplendent in formal military dress, modified with traditional elements, while Lumina wore a simple white gown adorned with luminescent crystals. General Stone observed from a position of honor, his dress uniform displaying decades of service. The general's expression held approval and something that might have been paternal pride. Nearby, surprisingly, stood Thorax, not as an enemy, but as an official representative of the Vaxian government, his presence a powerful symbol of the changing relations between their peoples. Vrax presided over the ceremony, his role as cultural liaison making him uniquely qualified to bridge the traditions of different species. He spoke first in Stellaris, then translated to English for the human attendees. We gathered to witness the soul bond, the deepest connection in Stellaris culture. Through this ancient ritual, three souls will be joined as one family, transcending biology, transcending species, united by choice rather than circumstance. Vrax turned to Thomas. Thomas Riley of Earth, once guardian, now beloved. Do you freely enter this bond knowing it joins you forever to Alara and Lumina, Starlight? Will you stand with them through triumph and adversity across all the stars and beyond? Thomas's voice carried clearly through the hall. I will. Vrax turned to Alara. Commander Alara Starlight of the Stellaris, do you accept this human as your bonded partner to share your strength with his to make him part of your lineage and clan? I do, Alara replied, her composure barely containing the emotion beneath. Finally, Vrax addressed Lumina. Lumina, Starlight, daughter of stars, do you accept Thomas Riley as your father guardian to guide you, protect you, and walk beside you on your journey? Lumina's voice was clear and unwavering. I do, now and always. Vrax presented a crystalline vessel containing a luminous blue liquid, the essence of life from three worlds Earth, Stellaris, and the neutral ground of Frontier Point where your paths converged. Each dipped their hands into the vessel. As they did, the liquid began to glow more intensely, responding to their touch. When they withdrew their hands, identical markings had formed on their wrists, overlapping the Valorian bracelets, with patterns both ancient and new. What once was three now is one, Vrax proclaimed. Family bound not by obligation but by choice, not by blood but by spirit. Let all species witness this union and understand its significance for our shared future. As the final words of the ceremony echoed through the hall, the gathered assembly erupted in sounds of approval and celebration from a dozen different species. Thomas felt something he had not experienced since before Kandahar, a sense of belonging, of purpose that extended beyond mere survival. Lumina slipped her small hand into his, while Alara's fingers intertwined with his other hand. Through the soul bond, Thomas could sense their emotions as clearly as his own. Lumina's unbridled joy, Alara's deep contentment tinged with lingering amazement that this hardened human warrior had become part of their lives. Family, Thomas said softly, the word carrying weight it had never held before. 6 months later, Thomas sat at his desk in the newly established Trilateral Security Council headquarters. Reports from all three species streamed across his display, updates on joint security protocols, cultural exchange initiatives, and most significantly, the first successful deployment of the Harmony Project. The door to his office slid open as General Stone entered, looking more relaxed in semi-formal diplomatic attire than Thomas had ever seen him in military uniform. The preliminary results from Drexus 3 are in, Stone announced without preamble. The Harmony technology has successfully restored 30% of the planet's damaged biosphere in just 2 months. At this rate, the entire surface will be habitable within a year. Thomas nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. A planet that suffered some of the worst fighting in the Stellaris-Vexian conflict, now becoming a symbol of cooperation. Poetic justice, Stone agreed, settling into a chair opposite Thomas. Thorax is planning a state visit next month to inspect the progress. His public support has been instrumental in maintaining momentum. He's changed, Thomas observed. We all have. Stone studied his former subordinate with knowing eyes. Speaking of change, how's family life treating you? Still adjusting to being a husband and father after all those years alone. A smile rare in the old days, increasingly common now, crossed Thomas's weathered face. It feels right, like I found something I didn't know I was looking for. He glanced at the holographic image on his desk, showing Alara and Lumina against the backdrop of Frontier Point's environmental dome. Lumina has started combat training. insists that her Papa Guardian teach her Earth techniques alongside Stellaris methods. God help the galaxy when that kid grows up, Stone chuckled. Stellaris intelligence with human tenacity and a former Special Forces operator as a father figure. Thomas's expression grew more serious. She wants to understand both worlds, all worlds really. Says she's going to be an ambassador someday. Like father, like daughter, Stone observed. You've become quite the ambassador yourself, Tom. From the man who wanted to disappear to the linchpin of interspecies cooperation. The higher-ups are impressed, by the way. There's talk of expanding your role to oversee security for all joint projects, not just harmony. I go where I'm needed, Thomas replied simply. But my home is here now. The general nodded understanding, all that remained unspoken between them. I never thought I'd see the day when the man who defied orders in Kandahar to save innocent lives would find peace among the stars. Proves even old soldiers can find new missions worth fighting for. After Stone departed, Thomas completed his work and made his way through Frontier Point's corridors toward the education center. As he entered the training hall, he found Lumina instructing a group of children from various species in basic defensive techniques. At 10 years old, she had already become a bridge between worlds, her natural empathy enhanced by the diverse experiences of her unusual family. Stance wider, she was saying to a young Vexian child. Like Papa showed me. Balance is everything. Thomas watched with pride as his daughter, for that was truly what she had become, passed on knowledge he had shared with her. The sight reminded him of teaching younger recruits a lifetime ago, but this time the skills were being taught for protection rather than warfare. Valorian, Lumina called out joyfully upon seeing him using the title that had become a term of endearment. You're early, and you thought I might help with today's lesson, Thomas replied, stepping forward to join her. The children gathered around him with eager anticipation. Humans, Stellaris, Vexians, and others all looking to the legendary Valorian for guidance. Thomas began demonstrating a basic defensive move, his instructions clear and patient. This isn't about hurting others, he explained, but about protecting yourselves and those who cannot protect themselves. The greatest victory is the one that doesn't require fighting at all. As the session progressed, Alara arrived to observe her commander's uniform, exchanged for the diplomatic attire of her new role as Stellaris ambassador to Earth. Her eyes met Thomas's across the training floor, their soul bond allowing them to share a moment of connection without words. Later that evening, the family stood together on the observation deck of Frontier Point, watching as the first stars appeared above the Arizona desert. Lumina pointed excitedly as a bright light crossed the sky, the Harmony vessel returning from its mission to Drexus 3. That's the future, she said with childlike certainty. Healing instead of hurting. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder, the soul bond marking on his wrist glowing softly in the twilight. A future worth protecting, he agreed. Alara joined them, completing their small circle. A future we build together, she added, her voice holding the wisdom of her people. As night fell completely, Thomas Riley, once soldier, then fugitive, now guardian, and bridge between worlds, looked up at the stars with new eyes. The ghosts of Kandahar no longer haunted him as they once had. The weight of past failures had been balanced by present purpose. The loneliness of the exile had been replaced by the bonds of family. In saving a child from an alien world, he had ultimately saved himself, finding not just redemption, but renewal. The warrior had become a guardian, the guardian had become a father, and the broken man had become whole again among the stars. Come, he said to his family, let's go home. And together, bound by choice rather than blood, united by love rather than obligation, they walked toward their shared future, guardians of the stars and of each other.